What happens when one country decides to just remove the leader of another? It's a question that sounds like it's from a movie, but this isn't some theoretical debate. We're going to dig into a real-world event that put this question right at the center of the global stage.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll cover the raid itself, just the facts. Then we'll zoom out to see the bigger picture, the world before all this went down. From there, we'll get into the first questions that started popping up, follow the timeline of what happened next, and then we'll finish up by just taking a look at the unresolved situation we're left with today.
Okay, so let's start with just the facts. No whys, no what ifs yet. Let's just lay out exactly what we know happened during this raid in Caracas.
So it's January 3rd, 2026. A U.S. military operation gets underway in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. And this wasn't aimed at some military base. No, the target was the presidential palace itself, the absolute center of the country's government. U.S. Special Forces go in and they detain the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and also his wife, the First Lady. Just like that, the leader of a sovereign nation is taken into foreign custody. From there, Maduro and his wife are flown out of Venezuela. They're brought to New York to face charges. The official reason given for all this? Narco-terrorism. It's a very serious charge, basically accusing a government of being involved in drug trafficking to support terrorism. And with the president now gone, back in Venezuela, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez steps in. She's named acting president and takes over leadership of the government. Okay, so those are the basic facts of what happens. But something like this is way more than just a list of events. It's a huge shock to the system. So now let's pull back a bit and really understand why this raid in Caracas instantly became such a massive global story. What we're talking about here has a specific name. It's called a military intervention. And we need to be clear, this isn't just, a strongly worded letter or some economic sanctions. This is one country using its military to directly get involved in another country's business. It's one of the most serious things a nation can do, and the effects can ripple out for years, even decades. It's no surprise the whole world snapped to attention when this happened. The U.S. and Venezuela. Well, their relationship has been tense for a long, long time. We're talking years of sanctions, of accusations flying back and forth. So this raid, it wasn't the start of something new. It was a massive escalation of a conflict that had been simmering for a very long time.
And the fallout from this goes way beyond just Venezuela. Think about it. First, there's the oil. Venezuela has huge oil reserves, so this immediately throws a wrench into global energy markets. Then it kicks off a huge global debate about a core idea: national sovereignty. Can a country just be a country without outside interference? And finally, it sets a brand new and very controversial example for how international law works, or doesn't. So to really get a handle on how big of a deal this was, we gotta rewind. Let's paint a picture of what the world looked like right before this raid. What was the normal in both Venezuela and the U.S.? What were the rules everyone was playing by before this whole thing turned the table over?
First, let's talk money, or more specifically, oil. For decades, if you thought about Venezuela's role in the world, one word came to mind: oil. They were a major player in OPEC, the big group of oil exporting countries. That meant that what happened with their oil production mattered everywhere. Any little hiccup in Venezuela could affect the price you pay for gas, all the way on the other side of the world. Politically, things inside Venezuela were tense. You could say it was a powder keg, really. For years, the country was basically split into two camps. You had the government, led by President Nicolas Maduro, trying to hold on to power while the economy was in free fall. And then you had the opposition movement, which saw Maduro as a dictator and had support from countries like the U.S. Okay, now let's look at the U.S. side of things before the raid. On paper, the rules for using the military seemed pretty clear. The Constitution sets up this balance. The president is the commander-in-chief, sure, but Congress is the only body that can actually declare war. It's a fundamental part of the system, right? The whole idea is to make sure no single person has the final say on sending troops into conflict. So that was the world as it stood, a world with these established situations, these clear roles, even if they weren't always followed. But this raid just shattered all of that. And in the quiet moments right after, people stopped asking what happened and started asking, wait, how did this happen? So was the whole government aware this was about to happen? That was the first big question, and the answer was pretty shocking. The president acknowledged that, no, he did not give Congress any advance notice before the operation. It was a decision made entirely by the executive branch in private. Did that cause problems? It did. It immediately raised serious constitutional questions. The fact that the president had acted without consulting Congress created an immediate backlash from lawmakers. Suddenly, the raid in Venezuela had kicked off a whole new debate right inside the U.S. government.
The raid itself was really just the first move. In the days that followed, a whole series of events started to unfold, one after another. So let's walk through the timeline of what happened right after the initial operation. Okay, so the raid happens on January 3rd. But things really get moving about 5 days later, on January 8th and 9th. That's when we see a flurry of activity in government, in diplomacy, and with the economy that started to define what would happen next. First up, on January 8th, the U.S. Senate responded. They debated and then passed a resolution, and it was a direct pushback against the president's action. The resolution was meant to limit his ability to take any more military action in Venezuela without getting approval from Congress first.
So it was a unified decision?
That's what was so notable. It wasn't just a simple party line vote. The resolution was led by the Democratic Party, but 5 senators from the president's own Republican Party actually voted for it. That was a big deal. It showed that this wasn't just political opposition, that some in his own party were concerned.
At the same time all this was happening in the Senate, the president was making his own moves. He publicly announced that he was going to meet with Maria Corina Machado, who is a prominent leader in the Venezuelan opposition. It was a clear signal of support.
And what about the country itself?
While the president laid out a plan for rebuilding Venezuela's economy, the idea was that U.S. oil companies would step in and invest a lot, at least $100 billion to get the country's oil infrastructure back up and running. So that's where the chain of events leads us. A military raid, a constitutional debate back in the U.S., and a massive plan for reconstruction. All of which leaves us in the present moment, with a situation that is, well, still very much unresolved. So when you step back and look at it, here's what we know for sure. A foreign leader was removed from power. A conflict over war powers is now happening within the U.S. government, and the entire future of a major oil-producing country is now being decided. These are the pieces left on the board. And that's why this feels so unresolved. We don't know what Venezuela's political future will look like. The debate inside the U.S. over who has the authority to do something like this is far from over. It really feels like the long-term consequences of this raid are just starting to come into view.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway here. It reminds you that in the world we live in, a crisis in one nation can very quickly become a decision for another. And that leaves us with this final thought to ponder. When one nation's crisis becomes another's decision, what happens next?